Good morning, everybody, and welcome again to the Contemporary Online Worship Service. I'm Pastor Kennan, and I'm glad that you've joined us for the message. We are in our series, The Ordinary Ways of God, where we're doing a chapter of Ruth every single week. This is the second week, so we'll be in Ruth 2 today. Now, we had a really good talk last week, and we kind of discovered in Ruth chapter 1 that there was really no mention of God, which I thought is very interesting for a chapter of a book in a Bible. But we kind of decided that after reading it, we could really see God in the fabric of the story. You see, there were these motifs like a stranger in a foreign land who needed to be welcomed. There were widows, and their care came into question. And so we see God kind of woven into the fabric of the story, because these are motifs that we find in all kinds of different places in the Bible. And so we also kind of noticed that one of the places where we saw God was in the empathy and in the compassion of God's people. And so even though God's name wasn't mentioned, God is clearly there. And then we see how God takes action in this dire situation that they're in. There's a big famine going on, and we see God move, and then we arrived at the kind of edge of this abundant harvest back in Bethlehem. And I asked that we continue as we go through these books to look for these two reoccurring themes. And one of them is that God uses ordinary people to bring hope in hard situations. And then the other one is that God's also does some ordinary things, but they're God's ordinary things. So extraordinary God has some ordinary ways. They're not necessarily our ways, but they're still ordinary for God. And so we wanted to look again for those two themes today. Now, like I said, we left off with Naomi and Ruth, and they arrived at Bethlehem, which means house of bread, and that they're at the very beginning of this great harvest that was about to take place. And so we're going to talk about that. And let me also remind us that, this church of ordinary people, when they put their trust in God, who had Christ in them, they really gave off a lot of hope, where it didn't seem like there was a lot of hope. And so y'all are going to help us unpack this. We're in Ruth 2. We're going to begin in verse 1 and go through 13. And I believe we're reading from the NRSV, if you want to join us that way as well.
Now Naomi had a kinsman on her husband's side, a prominent rich man, in the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain, behind someone in whose sight I may find favor." She said to her, "Go, my daughter." So she went. She came and gleaned in the field behind the reapers. As it happened, she came to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech. Just then Boaz came from Bethlehem. He said to the reapers, "The Lord be with you." They answered, "The Lord bless you." Then Boaz said to his servant who was in charge of the reapers, "To whom does this young woman belong?" The servant who was in charge of the reapers answered, "She is the Moabite who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab." She said, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the reapers." So she came, and she has been on her feet from early this morning until now, without resting even for a moment.
Then Boaz said to Ruth, "Now listen, my daughter. Do not go to glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Keep your eyes on the field that is being reaped and follow behind them. I have ordered the young men not to bother you. If you get thirsty, go to the vessels and drink from what the young men have drawn." Then she fell prostrate with her face to the ground and said to him, "Why have I found favor in your sight, that you should take notice of me when I am a foreigner?" But Boaz answered her, "All that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told me, and how you left your father and mother and your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. May the Lord reward you for your deeds, and may you have a full reward from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge." Then she said, "May I continue to find favor in your sight, my Lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, even though I am not one of your servants."
This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. All right. So now remember that this story is in the time just following Judges, which is kind of this dark time, and they're kind of now coming out of it. It seems with this whole famine thing, and we drew some comparisons last week also of how we're also in that same place. So it's kind of eerie that these situations, these two situations, are so similar, and so. Today, since we are coming out of this kind of global pandemic now for the second time, I want to talk about hope. I want to have a conversation about hope and kind of get us started. I thought I'd pose this question in conversation is, what is it that you're hoping for where it's kind of like this cautious hope or a little bit of a half-hearted hope where you hope that it happens, that when we come out of the pandemic, but you're not sure if it will. So it doesn't kind of feel like that really solid hope, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So kind of talk to me about your thoughts on the things that you may be kind of half-heartedly hoping for right now.
It's gonna sound kind of silly, but for people to find their place, I feel like the pandemic shook a lot of things, jobs and purposes and how people felt about each other. So my hope is that people find they're happy and like a time to just fully be who they want to be and come out of like the darkness of it, which is kind of one of the reasons why I picked Marvelous Light. It's just like, I feel like we've all been under such a cloud that my hope is that people find they're happy and like their purpose of it.
That's great, thank you. How about you?
Yeah, for sure. I agree with what Amber said, and also too, like, just that people can find maybe like an appreciation for certain things that wasn't there before, you know? So whether it's having a job or being able to contribute to society, or whether it's, you know, health of family or even of a stranger, you know, where hopefully after all this comes to a point to where it's said and done in a way where hopefully that appreciation will be more widespread and can lead to, you know, a more promising future in all of those aspects.
So that's great. So gratitude and appreciation, happiness, those kinds of things. You know, for me, it's also a matter of embracing change and allowing that change to be good. And not just change as like a victim of the circumstance, but more like a change that's, you know, even though all of this happened, now it can be better because I'm going to take this opportunity to make it better. And so that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. But here are Ruth and Naomi, and they arrive in Bethlehem, and they're at this harvest now. And so I'm kind of wondering, did they just recklessly risk everything and kind of hope that fate would bring them to this like place where the world or the universe would smile down upon them just right, you know, and give them hope? And so I just want to know if their hope is just a matter of fate, kind of a fate kind of thing, and if so, like, what is the source of our hope? Where is our hope coming from? Are we just kind of hoping that fate's going to deal us a better hand, you know, going forward? And so, because I kind of feel like coming out of this pandemic now for the second time and knowing all that we know and having learned what we've learned and having the different ability to address the pandemic because we've made advances very quickly in medicine and other and treatment. So now that that's happened, you know, and we're coming out of it, are we living kind of half hopeful? You know, is that causing us to do that? And so I don't want to live a life of half hopeful. It's kind of like hoping that you win the lottery, right?
Right.
I'm hoping that this great event comes along, right, where the constraints of striving to make money and to put food on the table, becomes something like freedom that money affords to do things. And so kind of this rags to riches story. And I'm wondering if that's where Naomi and Ruth are, and if they've kind of recklessly put their hope in that. And so, or is it kind of more of this like kind of hippy dippy thought of all of the stars aligning, like everything, all of these conditions just have to coincidentally all be lined up in order for something to happen. They have to all converge at just the right place and just the right time. Jupiter and Mars have to be in alignment with low tide, and that kind of thing. Everything coincidentally has to happen in order to produce the outcome they're hoping for. Have they put all their hope in some hippy dippy kind of thing? Or is hope grounded in some kind of big break where somebody discovers something about them that causes them to believe in them so much that they champion them to fame and to fortune by the world's standards? Is that what they've put their hope in? And is that what we put our hope in? And I think it's really important to this story, because I think if we aren't careful and if we don't understand this story well enough, it would be really easy to make those kinds of claims and assumptions about what's going on here. And so we run the risk of not seeing what God is doing right now, And so, regarding this whole idea of a series of fortunate enough events happening, building on one thing to another and creating this great anomaly where something of biblical proportions takes place, and so much to the fact that a whole book of the Bible is dedicated to just it, I feel like that would just be absent of God. And so that's why that half-hearted hope kind of stuff is kind of making me, worried about what are we reading here? What's going on with them and what's going on with us in our moment of coming out of a dire situation. And so just remember those two themes that we're looking for. We're looking for how God used ordinary people to bring hope out of a really bad situation. And then we're looking at the ordinary ways that an extraordinary God works. And so really important that we keep that really front and center and listen for it in the story. And so today we get this guy with the best name ever, Boaz. Boaz, a man of great standing and wealth. Now, do you know a lot about Boaz? Can I share a little about Boaz with you?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so do you remember that story back a little bit with a lady named Rahab? She was a prostitute. She was in the city of Jericho, and Joshua had a couple of spies, and she hid them. And so that actually aided in Israel defeating Jericho, and the walls of Jericho came down. And then later on, Rahab lived with God's people and became part of that community, and she had a son. Boaz is her son.
Wow.
So this is the son of a prostitute. And now he's this great wealthy man in great standing. Something really, really right has happened in this family. So I think it's interesting how different this is from where, his preceding generation came. I mean, really interesting to see that. And so she names him Boaz, which means strength. Strength. But ironically, we never read Boaz commanding anybody. He's never telling anybody what to do. And he's extremely gentle and not forceful with Ruth, who is a woman. And so I think that's very interesting that that's what his name is, strength. But he's not forceful or doesn't command everything, even though he has all this money and power. He never abuses his status as this wealthy man. In all of these texts, he's never abused his power, and we see that in how he starts interacting with Ruth. And you'll see in the pages, including the story that will come, I hope you'll join us next week because the story continues, but you'll see there are even more opportunities for him to take advantage of her, and yet he doesn't. He doesn't do it. And so Boaz simply just wanted life to be better for Ruth. Just wanted it to be a good life for her because Ruth had been so kind to Naomi, his family member. He was just this ordinary man who lived generously because he did have gifts for giving. And he was humble. And he was strong because he was useful to God. See, that's where his strength was. He was useful to God. And I just wonder, how can we be inspired by this guy? Even though we may not have all the money he has, even though we may not have every gift that Boaz had, how can we be inspired? And I think it should be start off with that biblical word that kind of describes Boaz, which I think is often a misunderstood word in Christianity, which is the word meek. The word meek. Meek. I think some people think immediately crouch down, timid, shy, pretty much a doormat. And that's not what it means. It actually means to get a strength from a place of deep humility. And I immediately think of Jesus. I immediately think of the cross. Nobody would have ever thought a dead God. I just immediately think of Jesus. And so Boaz, even though Jesus would come way later, Boaz is being very Jesus-like in this moment. And also getting a strength from this sincere desire to serve God, which is what he's doing here with Ruth and Naomi. And so I just want to ask you, where is your strength coming from? Where's your strength coming? Where is your strength coming from these days, guys?
My circle, my people, friends and family and God. I mean, it's not perfect, but I've definitely have refocused a lot of things because, like you said, the world, it's been insane.
Yeah.
It's been crazy.
Right.
So, but I definitely think surrounding yourself with people like Boaz, kind and sweet, and I'm a really big empath, so
Yeah. Good. How about you? Thank you for that.
Yeah, definitely wouldn't be able to continue on if it wasn't for a great community of people around me, it's friends, family, that sort of thing. But I also draw a lot of strength from prevailing through some tough times in my own life and having God by my side to see me through those things. That gives me strength, gives me a real hope that
some confidence, right?
Yeah, that this too shall pass, and that we'll keep on moving forward no matter how tough it may seem at certain times.
Yeah, and I think what's amazing about Boaz to me is that he totally could just as easily say, it's my money. My money's making me strong. My money and my power and my name and my reputation and my this and my that, he totally could go there, right? And I just wonder for how many of us that's it. We kind of bank on our own strengths, on the things that we think we're self-made for, and we kind of leave God out of the story. We forget that God's woven into the fabric of it. Maybe your strength is coming from the 4 hours of sleep that you're getting at night because you're surfing your phone and looking at every single person's Facebook page and getting caught up in the countering and the responding and that kind of thing. And so you wake up tired to begin with. It's not a great source of strength. So think about where it is that you're trying to get your strength from right now. Especially if your goal is to make and come out with some positive change coming out of this pandemic. Is your strength coming from a daily encounter with God's word? I mean, this kind of stuff is so helpful in my week. I don't know about you, but just reading this word and seeing something positive and something hopeful. Or is it coming by passing out meals like so many do at Broadmoor on a Monday, Wednesday, or Friday at Red Stick Together, passing out meals to people in the community who need them, or those who are going out and building a home alongside a new homeowner that really just needs help in life. What could you afford to get rid of that's sucking you dry? That's not a source of strength, but that's depleting your strength. And I think these are things that Boaz can inspire us to ask. Because you see, he was disciplined. He was responsive, even to the slightest nudge from God. And there's this really interesting term when I was researching meek that's in the circles of equestrian world, and that is meeking a horse. Have you ever heard of that? So I read about this, meeking a horse. And basically what it is it's the disciplining of a horse by having the rider on the horse and then creating all kinds of chaotic situations around the horse so that the horse does not respond to all of that that's going on around it, but is only responding to the rider. So they might shoot guns, or they might, rattle rattles like a rattlesnake sound, or they may, have people moving around or things moving, or drag furs across the ground, to make sure that that horse is trained in such a way that it stands fast and strong and steady, so that in those moments of chaos, it's not bucking around and throwing the rider off. It's disciplining that horse. And I just want to know, are we disciplined as the horse with God as our rider? Is that what we're doing in our own lives? Are we responding only to God in this moment of chaos, or have we been flailing around like a wild child and responding to every person or everything we don't like or everything upsetting that we hear? Are we holding steady as God takes grip of us? Jesus said, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." Boaz, he had nothing to prove. He was controlled by kindness and humility and service. God, I want to be like Boaz, Later, when Boaz's great-great-great-grandson would build the temple, Solomon would name one of the two pillars at the entrance Boaz. Stability under God's control. Boaz, he had a lot to offer us, I think. And there is so much that we can glean from him. But the star of this story is still God. It's still God. We must be careful not to make the star of this story fate, or some big break, or some kind of celestial stars aligning, or coincidences that stack up to point to something good. What if instead of coincidence, we see God intentionally arranging a set of circumstances? Instead of these moments of just so happens that, it's actually realizing that these things, they would have never happened without both human effort of ordinary people and without an extraordinary God and God's providential work happening. God's ordinary providential work. And there it is. There's both of the themes right there. And so as we read chapter 2, we see this string of coincidences as God's works in and amongst the ordinary people in God's ordinary ways. Boaz, he emerged as this new revived hope in this story for Naomi and Ruth. He was just coincidentally related to Naomi's deceased husband, Elimelech. He was just coincidentally this man of high morals and wealth and means. He just coincidentally meets Ruth out in some random field, and he just happened to be there at the same time. She was there taking a merciful charity that was being offered to her behind the reapers of his harvest. And that just is coincidentally a law in the customs of Israel where you leave a little extra from the fields so that the poor can glean from them. It sounds like God maybe went ahead of some of this and orchestrated it. So were Boaz and Ruth just fateful stars that were all aligning at the right time? Was Boaz Ruth's lottery win? Was he her sugar daddy? No. He was tender and he was protective when he didn't have to be, because he had a sense of the Lord. Remember Christ in him from last week? He had God, the Spirit of God in him. He was generous, and he gave her permission to drink fresh water during her work of gleaning, and then told those young men, don't you touch her. He protected her. He showed her favor, and he was clearly so impressed with her that she had abandoned her own country to go with Naomi and be there. That fidelity, it touched him. It's beautiful when Boaz promised Ruth that God would bless her and be a safe harbor for her. And he said this, the Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given by the Lord, the God of Israel. See him making God the star, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Look at him making God famous. That's humility. See what God is doing according to Boaz? Repaying good, rewarding, blessing, protecting, providing comfort and safety through God's ordinary people. God's the star. So Jesus-like. Later in the day, Boaz invited Ruth over for a meal of bread and wine, if you keep reading. And there, she takes refuge under the Lord's wing as she's invited to that table. And after a long and productive day, Ruth returned home to Naomi, who had learned about her meeting Boaz, and instead of bitterness, remember she had named herself Mara? Instead of bitterness, she said this, may Boaz be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. Pretty hopeful for a lady named Bitter. You see in this testimony, we see God's heart of provision for those in need. And church, God sees you in this moment. In this moment where we're coming out of a pandemic, God sees the effects of the hard times upon all of us, brought on by a global pandemic that no one asked for, if not other things. And we have the assurance here that God will provide generously for us, and that it's actually God's heart to do so. We also see the remarkable obedience and stewardship of a generous man who always is aware that a portion of his resources were not his own, but to be used to be shared freely with those who need them. Israel had just come through a massive famine. And Boaz, he could have easily been tempted to just harvest and hoard everything that came in. They were just coming out of it. They were out of a season of deprivation, just like we are. And so it's easy to want to hold on and to hoard things. And we're at risk for falling for that. But Boaz showed obedience and trust. He was meek. With God as his rider, he stood steadfast and firm regardless of what chaos was going on. And what if our households, what if our church, what if we're the ones who emerge from this global pandemic like Boaz did? Showing obedience, showing trust, keeping only what we need and taking the rest and helping somebody else with it, because there are a lot of people who need more than we need. What if we're the ones offering hospitality the way that Boaz did for all of the Ruths and Naomis of this world? Friends, we're not here coincidentally. The stars didn't just align. There's no big break happening or good fortune taking place. Clearly, it's God at work, intervening in remarkable ways here at Broadmoor and in our community and in our world, bringing hope and provision out of a scene that was formerly death and devastation. We still have the scars on our campus. We still bear the scars in our families of our missed loved ones. But God said, "My thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than yours, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts." Given the disruption and the disorientation of the pandemic season, we need a regular reminder of this more than ever. It doesn't negate or take away or invalidate our experience, all of the things that we've been through, but God's ways are indeed not our ways. But they do accomplish more than any of us could ever imagine. They could have never imagined what was at work here. God is redeeming us in this moment right now. God is redeeming it. Boaz was an example of obedience. He did his work in the right way, and he didn't cut corners. In fact, he left those corners for others. The question is, will we create on our margins enough for others to have? Coming out of these difficult days of the pandemic, let's meet the days to come with obedience and trust, and with open hands rather than these clenched fists that hoard and harvest only for ourselves. Let's be the hope that God intends for God's people. Let's be the hope. We aren't fate. We aren't good fortune. We aren't stars that align or someone's big break. We are ordinary people that an extraordinary God will use in God's ordinary ways. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.